Hi, all. Lovely to see you. Thank you very much for taking the time on a Tuesday evening. Appreciate the weather's getting a bit nicer. I'm just going to give a few minutes for people just to filter in. Perfect. Well, thanks again for taking the time. So we won't take up much more time before getting started. Um, I'm going to introduce my fellow panelists shortly, and just in terms of people sort of taking notes and messaging stuff like that, just to let you know that we can see what people put in the chat, but others can't, and there will be a sort of Q&A section at the end. So I'm going to introduce myself and then hand over to my panelists to just introduce them. My name is Simon Pedley. I'm head of product at Dukes Plus, which includes Oxbridge applications. So I do a lot of work, particularly developing new things to support all of our sort of OA students to succeed as best they can in a very sort of competitive landscape. I originally have a philosophy and theology degree from Oxford, Jesus College, Oxford, and then an economics degree from MSc, but sort of an economics degree from UCL. And more pertinently, I think I was a head of sixth form for many years, and then advised multi-academy trusts on particularly how to get students into high demand courses, particularly Oxbridge, particularly medicine as well. So that's why we're sort of thinking about some sort of as much information as we can give you guys on sort of a question we get asked quite a lot, which is, why is it the case that students that have got straight A stars, very high achieving students, particularly at GCSE, really strong academic students, just don't quite make it, particularly when it comes to sort of interview for Oxbridge in particular. So what is it that helps them to stand out? And we're not saying that this is the only answer, but we would sort of talk to you today a little bit about how conducting pieces of original research can help to make you a more competitive applicant, give you a little bit more to talk about, and then to talk a bit about how you would then go and do that. If you were going to go and do something original, how would you go and do it? How would it work? And at this point, this is where the people that we all want to hear from are here on the call with us to help talk that through. And so I'm going to let them just sort of introduce themselves. So, would you be able to just introduce yourself briefly for us?
Sure thing. My name is Soham. I'm a neurosurgeon clinically and academically for all of you. I tutor at Oxford University. I've been involved in tutoring for 8 years now, and I've seen many cohorts, been involved in the interview process, and I am looking forward to talking to you all about what the interview process is looking for and reality why we're doing this webinar with you today. In terms of my qualifications, I did a medical degree at Oxford University many years ago. I then subsequently did a master's in public health, and following on from that, I've undertaken PhD work as well as taken degrees in education. But you don't have to do all of that if you want to be a neurosurgeon or if you want to be a doctor. It's just the path I've taken.
I should have given you your full academic title, Dr. Bandyopadhyay, but would you be able to just sort of tell us a bit about your journey to where you are? Is this something that you always knew that you were interested in, the sort of more academic side of medicine, or is that something that came a little bit late?
That's a really good question. So Oxford and Cambridge, by the nature of their design, are, I would say, two of the remaining very few universities in the world that prioritize your development as an academic as well as a clinician. A lot of the other medical schools around the country are more focused on you getting in front of a patient as soon as you can on day one. In Oxford and Cambridge, the focus is more on you getting experience in how to write papers, how to analyze data, how to present findings. And it also teaches you how to present findings to different people, whether that's your patients, whether that's fellow academics, whether if you're interested in policy making, government ministers, NGOs. So it's more of a holistic education than simply this is what it takes to become a doctor or this is what it takes to become a surgeon. So by the nature of my education, I was probably doing at least 2 to 3 essays per week, which is the norm for medicine at Oxford or Cambridge. And so by the time I finished my medical school, I had written so many more essays and done so much more academically than my peers at other universities that when it came to doing academic work, progressing in the scientific field, making new discoveries, I'd had a lot more experience in doing that at medical school because that's the USP of going to Oxford or Cambridge and studying medicine there. That it was a natural fit because I'd been trained in doing that for so long. And in reality, it offers you a very different perspective into healthcare because not only are you reading the evidence that dictates your practice, you're creating the evidence that dictates other people's practice, and you're constantly helping patients with the questions that matter most to them, the ones that are unanswered, the ones that continue to affect them to this day.
So I'm going to move to a bit. I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here. Now, then, what is the most interesting thing that you're sort of looking at the moment? If you're going to go like, my next thing I want to really find out about, my next research project, the next thing I'm going to study, what's the next big unanswered question?
Yeah, so there are so many unanswered questions, but I guess the one that we're closest to a breakthrough is for a type of stroke. This is the deadliest stroke that exists in the world. It's called a subarachnoid hemorrhage. It's a type of stroke where one of your blood vessels in your brain bursts and you get a big bleed in the linings of your brain. And this type of stroke, unfortunately, carries a really bad outcome. A third of people who have the stroke die immediately. A third of people who have this stroke have long-term disabilities. And the remaining third continue to have some issues, even if they get back to work, they get back to school. And this is a stroke that occurs in young people. So as you can imagine, it's really bad for them in terms of the longevity of their life, in terms of what it means to the economy. And unfortunately, there's very few treatments out there that exist for this stroke. But with a lot of work that we've done on tissues and then subsequently in preclinical models, so that's non-human models, and then early phase data that we're seeing even in humans, there is potentially a new therapy coming up that seems to be doing wonders in terms of reducing the damage to the brain.
Fingers crossed. Thank you very much. So, and then, Rennie, would you be able to just introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, my name is Bruno, and I'm a postdoc, a researcher at the MRC Laboratory of Molecular Biology, which is based in Cambridge. And I'm also a bi-fellow of Corpus Christi College at the University of Cambridge, where I teach chemistry supervisions to undergraduates who are studying natural sciences. And I also do the admissions interviews for natural scientists. Before coming to Cambridge, I did both my undergrad and my PhD or DPhil, as we call it, at Oxford. And throughout my PhD, I also taught throughout all of my kind of years, the undergraduates, again, like all the years, organic chemistry specifically then. And I also did a wide range of like admission work, open days, like outreach programs and stuff like that, that the college was running at that point. And obviously, because I did my undergrad at Oxford, I also went through the interview process myself. So I kind of had an experience of both sides of applying and then doing it myself, and all of these things. But yeah,
What did you think then, Brilliant, about, because that's interesting. I was going to ask you something else, but that made me think of something slightly different. What do you think was the biggest? We will talk about this a bit later, but like from the point of view of applying, and then at the point of view of assessing, what do you think might be, say, like the biggest, say, misconception you might have had as an going in for the undergraduate degree that you now know was not right as somebody who was actually doing the interviewing?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that like, especially coming into my interviews, I thought that like not knowing a question immediately was like a sign of like failing the interview, as like not doing well, like being asked questions and not being able to answer it immediately. was kind of like quite tough. And in one of my interviews, I had an experience where like basically like every question's like when I thought I answered well, we just kept on moving along until like we came to something I didn't know immediately, and I was like grilled on that, and I felt like I was like doing so poorly. But actually, it turns out once I started interviewing myself, is that actually we want to get students to the point where they don't know the answers, right? When we ask them questions about things that they haven't covered yet and see um how they can adapt in those situations. And that was something that I think was like I mean something I realized during my undergrad already after speaking to my tutors, but that was like a big thing that I was really worried about getting things wrong. And you realize that when you're an undergrad at Oxford in your tutorials or in Cambridge in your supervisions, you'll get things wrong all the time. Like you will make mistakes, you'll answer questions wrong, and that's like that's how you learn ultimately, right? Is by making yourself vulnerable to like basically the embarrassment of getting things wrong and then learning from those mistakes and getting them right.
Yeah, that was something that I do not have either of your experiences, but from my sort of understanding is that as an undergraduate, because I did a humanities degree, I did philosophy and theology, and so the equivalent there of almost getting it wrong is getting to the point where you go, I've contradicted myself,
Mm.
or I don't know, actually don't have an immediate answer to that. I'm going to need to think about that, or like, and dealing with that level of
Yeah.
uncertainty and being comfortable in the act of going, I don't actually have the answers.
Yeah.
And for me, that was like one of the first times that had happened. That somebody had asked me a question. I was like, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't
Mhm.
know. So that leads us a bit on to the first sort of part of what we're going to cover today, which is a discussion about those sorts of character traits that sort of separate the and intellectual habits that separate those who've got a string of A stars from those who then can really sort of stand out towards personal statement and more so towards interview. I'm going to be bringing Bruno and so on in to discuss as we're going along. I can see some people putting things in the chat. I'm going to do the best that I can potentially during this, but we might need to save sort of slightly more other questions as we move to a Q&A at the end. So we sort of have looked at this and thought about this is a bit sort of the straight A trap, and it a little bit alludes to what I was saying a little bit there, which was people have been very used to getting things right, and the Bruno was saying too that like people are very used to getting things right and being quite uncomfortable with saying, I don't know, like I'm not that sure. And we don't want to for a minute suggest that high grades are not necessary. Like they absolutely are. And I would also say that high grades are a sign that you have a lot of knowledge. It is not easy to get straight A stars without knowing quite a substantial amount of stuff and being a fairly adept thinker. So this is not to denigrate being able to achieve very high grades in your academic subjects at all. It's a real achievement if you are able to do that. But there is a risk that the optimization for exams and the optimization for the knowledge that is contained within exams. And I have to say that, when I taught A-level history, a lot of my students got A's. But why did a lot of those students get A's? It's because they knew the mark schemes inside out. And they knew exactly how to formulate exactly. They had a lot of knowledge, that's true, but they had the knowledge that was very specific to the areas that I was talking to. They hadn't read that widely. And they were very, very keen on making sure that they knew what the right answer was and also how that answer was phrased. And I think STEM, I think, is slightly different, but in humanities, I think there is a certain trap to thinking in a certain way, because that is how exam boards or examiners in particular are trained to go through and tick things off. I've often seen people as well with quite impressive reading lists. They have read a lot, but have they thought about what they're reading? Is the thing that they are reading? Often you can read books that are contradictory. One book will say one thing, another book will say something else. Again, particularly true within humanities, but will be true in STEM as well. Have we thought about how to reconcile those contradictions? Do we know where those how we might reconcile that? Have we thought about that outside of the reading that we're doing? Okay, I've read this book and I've read this book. How do I synthesize that and put that together? As well as the sort of general fear of being wrong. So these are the things that we would tend to, or that in my experience that I've seen with students where they have tended to be very academically bright and tended to stumble a little bit when they come to being really pushed on their thinking. And this is where I'm obviously going to take advantage of the fact that I've got people with first-hand knowledge and experience here on the call. But I remember speaking to this is like I appreciate sex because I spoke to one of my tutors, and we've got the tutors here on the call, but I'm nonetheless going to say that one of my tutors emphasized to me that when I asked him how they selected, as well as the things that we can see, and I'm not going to read out from the slide, he said it's people that would enjoy teaching, which is like, yes, people who've got the knowledge, they know what they're talking about, they can have that kind of constructive conversation with you because they know their stuff, but they've got that curiosity, they've got that level of independence. They can go away and they can research on their own, they can come back with interesting things to say. And again, particularly for I'm speaking for philosophy, theology, and to an extent economics here as well, like these are people that can just have interesting thoughts about the things that they have read, which is a bit of a sort of academic state of mind, really. So in terms of sort of medicine in particular, like you're looking at sort of prospective medics, particularly like we're looking at Oxbridge here, so maybe slightly different in terms of like selection criteria, as you've already alluded to. What would you say they really are sort of looking for in terms of, you've got three people all A stars, who's the one that's they're doing well?
Yeah, so there's three things that the Oxbridge medical interviews look at. One is your personal fit for the specialty. The second is your situational judgment. And the third is everything listed here, which is your curiosity and your independence. So in terms of the first two aspects, I can touch on that if you want to in the questions, but more focusing more on the third aspect, which is the curiosity and independence aspect. What we're looking for is not if you know the answers, because as it's already been discussed, it's easy enough to memorize a mark scheme. What's being looked at here is if you're being pushed, can you figure out what clues are being given to you to see what's not known, and therefore what is left to be experimented, left to be discovered, and building on that, can you build on the next step? So for example, if I give you a statement and you've ruled every single thing out, you know what the next step is. It's a bit like being like Sherlock Holmes. So once you've ruled out the impossible, whatever's left, however improbable, must be the next step. And therefore, you've got to work out what's the impossible, therefore, what's probable, what's improbable, what should you do to move these possibilities around. And that's what we're looking for. Yeah.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
No, after you.
No, I was just going to say, like, get excited to talk about this sort of stuff. Like a medicine interview, when I do medical interviews, I work with the Medic Portal quite extensively. One of the interview questions that I see break students' brains is a question of like, if you've got a disease that has a real prevalence rate of 1 in 100,000, and you've got a test for that disease that is 99% accurate, and you have been diagnosed with it, actually, how worried should you be? And it absolutely breaks people's brains to then get to the end of that and realize, oh, I almost certainly don't have the disease. And there's a real difference, just from what you were saying there, a real difference between students who will follow the logic and like be curious about it and accept the logic, and students who stick to the like, I know this at a very instinctive level, and almost refuse the step-by-step logical step after it. It's quite a fixed mindset versus quite a sort of flexible, follow the facts where they lead kind of mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. But I want to state that if you feel you're in the first category, that's not necessarily true. There's been many students who I presume we've all tutored who come in who really struggle with that switch in mindset. And then as you tutor them, it's not a lack of ability, it's the fact that they've never been asked to do these things before. And this is where research is really helpful, and because it makes you think laterally. And that's what really the interview is thinking of. It's, can you actually think laterally? Can you not just follow a syllabus and be guided to the answer, but can you stop to think, is that actually the answer? Just because someone's told you that's the truth, does it make it the truth? And exactly as you said, can you work out that because something's really rare, if a false positive is actually quite high?
Exactly, and what's the logical impact of that? That's true. Thank you. And Bruno, from the sort of natural sciences point of view, what are you kind of like? It's a little bit different then. What are you looking for then? If somebody's in front of you, what's that like? Yeah, everyone's got the same grades, but that one's standing out.
Yeah. Well, I think there's multiple factors. For sure, I think like the things that are on this list here are all really important. But it's really what we're trying to look for is we try to, especially in Cambridge, design the questions in a way that doesn't actually matter what people have done before. So we like asking like kind of like not like just jump big problems onto people, but ask like a big problem that has to be deconstructed into smaller components. So like to see like I think I guess like quite a lot of like education prior to university is like down to this like really like problems broken down into really small digestible parts, right? It's about like learning definitions and learning about like solving like small problems that seem to be independent from each other based on these formula you learn or definitions and so on. And like sometimes students are like really caught off guard by being faced by a big problem that needs to be broken down into components and then each one tackled individually, right? So quite often we ask questions that like actually everyone just like has all the knowledge to solve, but they just need to figure out how to break it down to the things that they've actually done in school. So I think that's a really important skill to also connect the different areas that you have learned from, right? Especially in natural sciences, it's not just chemistry, right? But like this distinction between the subjects, between chemistry, physics, biology, is like very artificial, right? The lines are blurred. You can use knowledge from all different areas to solve a problem. And then the other thing, I guess, that I look for as well is like really, really good understanding of the basics and of the fundamentals, right? Because like if you have like really good basics and fundamentals, you can use those to like reason and to argue through very complex problems without having necessarily learned about them in school, right? Like if you really truly understand like the fundamental principles of like I don't know like electronic structure, and from there you can go to trends in the periodic table and so on, you can answer questions that are way beyond the scope of what you have learned in your syllabus without actually having to encounter them. But you really need to have a good understanding. I mean, like, there's like almost like this, like, when it comes to like personal statements, like, so many students who are applying for chemistry will say they have read this book, Why Do Chemical Reactions Happen? Right? If you're writing your personal statement now and you're reading this book and you're going to put it in, it's great. I have never read it, but when I see that someone has put it in their personal statement, I will always ask them a very simple question, which is what is a chemical reaction? And the number of students like who are applying to study chemistry or natural sciences with a focus on chemistry, who then struggle to answer what a chemical reaction is like sometimes like quite staggering, right? Like it's all well and good to like go outside the scope, and I really, really encourage you to like read out and expand your knowledge beyond the syllabus. But really do make sure that you know your basics really, really well and you understand them well, because it's very easy to catch people off guard by just asking the simplest questions. Yeah.
I think making sure you know the basics is that I didn't want to undermine. Make sure that you have to know your stuff as well as going beyond. It is really important to make
Yeah.
sure that those bases are covered.
Because you
Um,
get people who do all of these impressive things, right? And have like clearly have a passion, but have kind of like spread themselves too thin by doing too many different things. And I think like really focusing on like really understanding something well is what is also something that like I would be very encouraged by positively in a candidate.
and that's something that I'd be wanting to sort of touch on a little bit later in terms of ideal state sort of research design stuff like that. Is that you don't need to, if you're going out to go and sort of research something for yourself and do something independent, you don't have to invent a new field of chemistry. Like you don't need to do that. Like you don't need to like uncover some entire lost tribe that you can sort of study for an anthropological thing. Like there is a limited thing that you can do and know really, really well is as important as anything else. So this is something that internally in the office I got laughed at when I mentioned, but I think there's something here. So sort of to sort of solidify what we sort of think at Oxbridge applications about sort of the academic resilience that we've been talking about. There's sort of habits of mind that, again, I want to make it really clear. Like, yes, absolutely can be developed. Like, I do not believe for a minute that people are like fixed in terms of their mindset. They absolutely can grow. They absolutely can develop. But they often, anyone will need sort of help to do that. And with the right tutoring, the right help, you absolutely can. So it's absolutely true. As someone was saying that like this is not something that you either have or you haven't got. more something that it's worth trying to develop. So the mindset of the gritty scout, right? So Duckworth talks about grit as being the sort of mix of passion and perseverance. So if you've got grit, you would tend to stick with something. You wouldn't tend to be as easily dissuaded. You are able to, something that we would all probably know, like you've got a problem sheet of 20 questions, you can make your way through it. You've got that level of like perseverance and the passion to do so. But also the sort of scout versus soldier mentality that I think is really important. So Gallup contrasts a soldier mentality as somebody who thinks a thing, knows a thing, and views that they would need to defend that thing against all comers. So if we have spent any time at all on social media, I think we've probably seen soldier behavior quite often. These soldiers are not receptive to information that might challenge their view. Whereas the scout is designed to go out and look at the lay of the land. The scout needs to find out where the enemy positions are. They need to relay back accurate information about where troop movements, all that kind of things come from. So the scout is constantly updating their mental model. They're constantly updating their priors, their beliefs, based on available evidence that comes in. And so the scout is somebody who, if you have a scout mindset, yes, believes something is true, starts with prior assumptions, but will seek knowledge with the aim of trying to update that. They will not be protective over the things that they initially believe. They will keep trying to seek the truth. And along with the grit, they will have that kind of passion and that direction to go and do so. And that's the sort of thing that we're looking at in terms of like academic resilience. So resilience within an academic context. We're not mindlessly defending something that we just know to be true and are not interested in finding anything else out. But we're also not sort of lazily picking and choosing bits and pieces of information and stuff like that. We are directed to seek the truth, to update priors. That's the kind of mental model that we'd be wanting to look for. Okay, so I mean, I know we've sort of touched on this a little bit in terms of sort of what you're looking for here. So I'm going to skip past this a little bit because I think this was when I'd planned this to be less interactive between the panelists than I think it was. But I want to talk a little bit about how sort of doing some independent research works. And I want to really table set here and go, there are many ways that you can develop this. And there are many ways that you can conduct pieces of research and you can go out and investigate things. But whether it's EPQ, whether it's something else, whether it's an essay competition, it is a really good example, a really good way of you going out and showing a level of independent thought and finding something new. And we want to be clear that for UK admissions anyway, it is not because that the end point of getting it published is something that the university admissions team is going to care that much about. They're going to be much more interested in what you actually learned. And so going out and I'm going to be talking to my panelists here about how they go out and they conduct research. How do they go about choosing a topic? How do they go and structure what their project's going to be? How do they conduct it? But in terms of the value here, it does show self-direction. It does show persistence, and it does show that engagement with your subject beyond the classroom. But what it gives you is that experience of being challenged, that experience of going out and having to structure your thoughts logically, to write something of a fair length, so say 5,000 words, taking into account multiple sources, multiple pieces of information that you have had to synthesize with potentially subject matter that is beyond what you would necessarily study immediately in school, gives you a lot of that experience. It's much more, to our mind, about developing you as a person through the process, as opposed to the end point of where you get to. Although if the end point is something that is very, very interesting to a bunch of admissions students, so much the better. But it's that process of developing that academic resilience, because it will require that to do it. So yeah, original research, it can demonstrate those habits of mind that Oxbridge are looking for. But it does not replace academic excellence. So we would need the academic excellence as well. And it's not a thing that we would say would get you in. And I don't think anyone I would know would do so. But again, it does really develop by doing that, by plotting that out, the important habits of mind. So, and we can talk a little bit about how we would think about how we would structure that and what that would look like and how we can help. But I want to sort of turn over to our panelists here just to go like, starting with yourself, Sam, like, what does good research look like? And I know it's a big question, but a piece of a paper, an academic paper that you would read, or I've read all your citations. There was not enough space to put them in the bio that we've got of you on the website. So we have to pick and choose. But you'd seem a good man to ask what, from your mind, good medical research looks like.
Yeah, so I think there are 5 buckets that I'd go down in terms of what makes something a good research. The first bucket is the question. And what do I mean by the question? I mean, what exactly are we trying to answer? And is it important for the people that we're trying to look after? So, or is it important for policymakers? So the first question really is you having a read around the literature, see what's being done, see what the gaps are, and also you talking to the people that matter, the stakeholders, to see if this is a question they need answering. It's well and good if you want to answer a question for your own sake, but if you're the only person in a million who wants to answer that question, is that really the optimal use of the limited resources that we have in the UK? The second thing is that I'm looking at is this novel or is this corroborating? So is this something that I'm trying to prove for the first time and it's more pilot and feasibility, or is this trying to corroborate previous data? In which case, this moves me on to my third thing, which is what are the limitations? If you imagine a distribution of people around the country, we'll see what we call a bell curve. There are the early adopters that whatever you publish, they'll be like, oh yeah, this is really good. I think this is what I want to do. And there'll be the real laggards who look at this and go, what is every single limitation to see why this might not be true and why I will be a soldier for my beliefs. In which case, you yourself have to figure out what all the limitations are for your project, and therefore what potential flaws might others have in terms of believing what you're trying to show. And sometimes you've got to design 2 or 3 experiments that prove the same thing, all with different limitations, but all that overlap each other. So the limitation of 1 is covered by experiment 2. The limitations of both experiment 1 and 2 are covered by 3. And by doing all of that, even if each one of them has its own limitations, they're all covered by the other experiments to prove that actually looking at everything, you're still getting towards the same picture. Number 4 of good research is how you write about it. So it's about how you articulate yourself. It's about how you think about the problem, how you showcase it to the audience so that they can understand what the next steps are to do, what to do with your research beyond just reading the paper and saying, this is good. And the final thing about what makes good research good is in terms of your flexibility in understanding what it doesn't show. So it's really important you don't overstate what it shows, because that would both look bad for your credibility, and it could also lure people to doing things that are potentially waste of resources or could even harm patients if your guidance is utilized without, because it's overstated its findings.
See, that's really interesting because Bruno, I think you were saying something similar when we were chatting the other day about people who make sort of massive grand claims about sort of research that they've been doing, and that can sometimes sort of actually cause them a bit of a cropper if they come into an interview and they're being asked about this piece of research that they've been doing, and that they've made claims that are just far too broad. Like, is that's something that I think we were discussing before, that ring true with you?
Yeah. I mean, like, there's always a danger of like overstating what you did, right? Like, let's say you work on like a research project, you do like an internship, you work in a lab that works on like a cancer drug, right? Or like developing a cancer treatment, right? And no matter how successful your research project is or whatever, statistically, I think like 99% of like drug candidates fail in the drug discovery process, right? Like, there's no point in saying in your personal statement, I worked in developing the new like cancer treatment for a certain type of cancer, like with small molecule therapeutics or something like that, right? Like, just be very honest about what you actually did, what skills you learned, both in terms of practical and theoretical skills, right? Like, the most valuable thing you're gaining in these type of like research appointments or something like that is practical skills, right? You've had experience in the lab and you've probably learned some chemistry along the way, right? So be very specific about the things you've actually learned and don't really overstate um, your contribution to the field, right? Like, I mean, science is like so collaborative. Progress largely happens in like small incremental steps, loads of people working on like projects, contributing. together. And it's like, and also like if you're very honest and like very direct and very concrete about what you've learned and what you've done, as opposed to trying to make it sound impressive or good, it'll be much easier for you to answer the questions we might ask about it, right? Like if you're very specific about like, I don't know, I worked on this type of chemical reactions and like these were the specific things that I focused on, like, I don't know, photoredox chemistry, whatever, it's very easy to ask a specific question. Whereas if you make some grand claims or like talk about things that you're not really familiar with that were part of kind of like the overarching research theme of the group, I might ask you something that you will not actually have any clue about because you didn't spend your time on that thing. You worked on something very specific as opposed to the grand field within your research that your research is placed in, right? And that's not as exciting. It doesn't sound or look as good if you read it to someone who isn't a chemist, for example, right? But to the interviewer, it then makes it like as a much more the kind of like fertile, and for you as the interviewee, it makes it much better interviewing experience should you be asked about it in the interview. Yeah.
Yeah, and to sort of draw sort of slightly humanities. So related, my undergraduate thesis was not I have solved the problem of evil. My undergraduate thesis was here are two competing views about ways you could address the problem of evil in theology, and these are ways that actually you could work as they are competing explanations that could be synthesized in this way, which was a fairly limited claim. Like I'm going to take two people who've written loads and loads and loads and loads about this, but disagree, and go, but actually here and here they are kind of saying the same thing without really realizing it, and I can tie this together into like a small but like actual contribution to a field that I could sit and defend for an hour because it was a limited claim. If I had said, don't worry, guys, I've solved the problem of evil, we're all fine, I don't think that that would have been anywhere near as successful, although I might have sold more books. And so lastly, in terms of, I just want to be interested in your guys' approach because like you obviously got quite a sort of high level here, but I think it's useful for people to know what the like gold standard here is. Obviously, it's not something that everyone's going to be able to do at sort of GCSE or A level, but again, it's useful to know where we're aiming. So now we've identified where. I was going to change the order for the last question, go to Bruno first, but then I didn't do that because I was right in the middle of my screen. Now you said sort of how you sort of start by looking at what good research looks like in terms of how you then take those things and go forward. Like how do you go and write something unique and genuine?
I think this goes back to what I said at the beginning, and it's about how you develop your writing skills. So I developed my writing skills initially by writing all the essays at Oxford, and then I got involved in writing blogs and little newspaper articles, and then I really got my teeth into all the original research articles that I've written. And this is something that people can get into at an early age as well. There are lots of magazines that encourage people at a young age to get involved, write for them, to think laterally, to think broader, to think creatively. And creative writing, knowing how to engage an audience, is an incredibly useful skill because science, when people read it, is often portrayed as something quite dry, something quite difficult to read. And that's us, that's our fault. Because if we write things that are dry and difficult to read, the people that it's going to impact the most, the people that can do most with the research, perhaps can't actually use the research for good. And those skills only come if you practice those skills in other avenues. So I would say the most important thing about writing original research is actually getting the skills to write in the first case, and that comes with practice. The second thing is have a strategy as to exactly how you're going to write. There are multiple formats out there as to how you should write a paper. I personally look at what we call the equator guidelines, which has about 1,000 different checklists as to what you should write and where you should write it for each different paper. So that provided you follow that checklist, people who are going through trying to look for evidence can just go through that paper in a structured format, know exactly where the evidence is, and know exactly what they're looking for, whether that's who we talk to, whether that's what the data is, whether that's what our interpretation of the findings are. It's all there in a structured format. And the third really important part about writing original research is about making sure you're collaborating with others. This isn't something you do on your own. It's very rarely that you can do something amazing, something that's actually transformative by yourself. It's about collaborating with others, learning from others. I've had so many mentors in my life, starting from medical school to when I was a doctor, who guided me through how I've written stuff, and I've done the same to many people as well. Because you don't start writing good original research until you've got a guiding hand to show you how it's done.
Perfect, thank you very much. And Bruno, yourself, how do you, because I think you'd be a slightly different approach, and it's slightly more given that it's chemistry rather than sort of essay based stuff. So how do you go about sort of the process of starting a research project?
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit more challenging, I think, in the field of natural sciences and chemistry specifically, because it actually takes a lot of training to be able to come up with a research project and to start it and to work on it. So I think it does require just a lot of guidance. But what's important, I guess, is that you know what you're actually interested in, right? Like, I'm not interested in all types of chemistry. Like, I am interested in a very specific type of chemistry. So I work on origin of life chemistry, right? Like, that's what I'm interested in. There's plenty of types of chemistry that I don't care about, I find really boring. And that doesn't mean they're good research, but they're not the research that I'm interested in doing, right? And as you're thinking about like being a chemist or doing natural sciences or doing like an academic research type of career, it's like you have interests, right? Like you know what type of things you're interested in, and that's like the first step, I think, quite often, that I think is really important, to actually realize what type of research you care about, like what area of chemistry, what are the questions that interest you. Because like, and it doesn't matter, like not everyone has to do, like, I don't know, like cancer research and drug development. Like I personally find those things like really boring, but it's important that you do something you really care about, that you are interested in, because like ultimately if you just do something that you think is going to sound good, it's like you're not going to enjoy it and you're not going to end up being interested in it, right? So picking something you're interested in, no matter how like impressive it might look like on paper or not, but just something that intrigues you, something you're keen to learn more about, right? Like, and that takes a lot of time, because like at the end of the day, like all of these subjects, like especially if you're applying for natural sciences, like I mean, there's like an infinite number of questions that are being asked, like topics that are being researched of varying levels of like breadth and depth and so on. So I would just say is that like when you're starting this journey and when you're thinking about starting a research project, is that really pick something that you are interested in. Um, and pick it based on like, yeah, what speaks to you, what you want to learn more about. Like I think that's like really the goal, especially at this stage before you're even starting your undergraduate degree, right? You want to show your perspective on the subject, like you want to showcase what your viewpoint is, and not kind of trying to engineer a persona for yourself that you think the admissions people are looking for, right? And it's very, very obvious, like when you read the personal statements or even when you interact with the people, that certain people have really like constructed this idea of what like a successful candidate looks like. And really what we're most of the time interested in is just who you really are, and like what kind of drives you, and what kind of research you're interested in doing, and what your passion for the subject is. And it's much easier to do it if you actually believe it than if you're pretending, right? That's what I'd say.
Sure. We had a very quick question in the chat. What's the elevator pitch for origin of life chemistry?
It's like, I don't know, I'd say it's like the one fundamental question, like where we came from, how life on Earth came to be. I think it's like probably one of the most interesting questions, the only other one being what happens to us after we die, and like we can't really answer that one. So yeah, I think it's like the most interesting question that we can probably find an answer to.
I know some theologians who disagree with you about that, but there we go. Um, cool. So I think we've heard sufficiently from some of the panelists here. I spoke to another professor of history just to get a sense there from him, and the main thing he talked about, and I think this is something that has been echoed here, is you don't need to invent we don't need to invent an entirely new field, an entirely new discipline at the age of 18, because I think and again I saw this sort of reference in the chat, sort of we're talking quite high level research here, like what we'd be expecting potentially of, again, I want to be careful with the word like expectation, because there isn't an expectation that you would have done a research project at all. I want to be really clear. It is a way of demonstrating some of these techniques. It is not by any stretch the only way that you could do so. But yeah, what we'd be looking at is something a little bit more streamlined potentially for some of the sort of younger age. We're not looking at sort of cancer breakthroughs. It can be something much more limited. And the example he gave to me was he had a student who was doing an undergraduate dissertation just on the references to and the significance of conspiracy theories in Trump's speeches, which he said was limited, but also you got loads of resources. Speeches, you can just go on YouTube and get hours and hours and hours and hours. So the other thing he points out, which is like, where are you going to get your content from? Like, where's the source of that information going to come from? And that's why that project, Conspiracies and Trump, was a good one, because you had all the information there. It was a limited thing that you were looking at, and it was relatively new, and that went on to do very well. So we've got a few times for some questions, but before you do that, what I want to do is just to outline that we have a project that we would be able to help you out with. Okay, so there are other research projects available. There are other essay prizes. We believe at OA we've got an opportunity to work with people here to develop a sort of 5,000 word research project, working in conjunction with like top academics as well as some of our mentors as well, to produce a excellent sort of standout piece of research. But the main point is that we just think you'd get the opportunity to talk and develop ideas, and to make sure that you're honing and solidifying your areas of interest. And so the QR code there that will take you straight to the website. I've noticed the very first typo on the webinar. That should say August rather than July. We'll be hosting a symposium in London in our big offices, where we will be giving people the chance to present their research. But the main thing we're offering is the opportunity to work with some top academics, some top Oxbridge mentors to produce a piece of research. But honestly, it's the friends you make along the way. Like, it is the intellectual skills and rigor that you can develop by doing that, that we think will help. Again, there are many other ways of doing this. There are many other ways of getting those skills, but this is a way that we'd be keen to work with you on as well. And that QR code will take you to the site. And we've probably got a few minutes for some questions, if there are any to be directed. I'm going to be fairly brutal. We may only be able to take 3 questions. So I can see if students on the IB program with extended essay, would this count? Yeah. So I actually probably could take. I taught the IB for a year.
I did the IB as well. I did IB.
You did
before,
the IB.
like, and
Okay,
I did an extended essay where I did a research project, and I put it in my personal statement, and I was asked about it in an interview, and I was very happy to talk about it. So I think it counts.
Yeah, I would say so too. I think the other thing is the extended project qualification. So the question is like a little bit who's doing the mentoring a bit, so it can be a bit with the extended DPQ and the supervisions. I did supervisions for a philosophy extended essay, and I could help with that because I was an Oxford philosopher back in the day, but I knew a lot of people who were supervising maybe a bit out of their expertise. That's the thing I'd be a bit careful of, just like making sure you've got that right thing, but it will get you that thing that you want to talk about, that the original thing at the end. Yeah. And in terms of maths applicants, I think for maths applicants, like showing that they can grapple with question sets and problems that are like a particular problem that is mathematical in nature, but beyond the curriculum that they're currently studying. So it's not necessarily like, can I do maths at a higher level? It's more like, can I apply mathematical techniques, and can I apply the sort of advanced available techniques I know to a different and new problem? Would be something I think worth sort of additional research. And so if there are questions related to the product here directly, what I would be really keen for people to do is to register your interest and register on the site, and we can give you more information, and we can get in touch with you. We can talk to you about this. I'd really encourage you to get in touch to talk to us about this. In terms of, and for a question about whether it can be designed for somebody doing a master's level, we'd be optimistic we'd be able to tweak it absolutely to make it helpful for you if you're applying to do a master's, that's fine. And research area, the last question here is a research area for international relations. I'm feeling more stumped here. I'm tempted to throw this over to you guys. But I would say there's an awful lot of research areas for international relations that I think could be very useful. I think one of the things I think might be very interesting is to look at like realism as a philosophy of international relations and the extent to which maybe we have seen a resurgence of realism in terms of how certain states are acting regarding international norms and international laws when that was not the case previously. And like, or to what extent were those things just sort of lip service? So that is maybe a bit of a broad claim, but off the top of my head, one that I think might have some room for independent research. Unfortunately, we've hit time, so our panelists are very, very, very grateful for their time, but we may need to let them go. I would really encourage you, if you are interested in discussing sort of areas where you can conduct research, be more than happy to chat to you. Again, if you sort of take the QR code there and do get in touch, do fill in registration forms, do get in touch with us, and we'll be able to help you decide and select what project might well be right for you. But I really appreciate your time. It's been great to talk to you, and thanks so much to Bruno Sohm. I'm really, really grateful for your time. It's been really, really illuminating, and thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And